This video is to help you practice your modal verbs, and we're thinking in particular about modal verbs in the present tense. And we're going to use these modal verbs to practice our German translation. Let's start with the conjugation table, and you might like to pause the video and see if you can fill this out yourself. Let's start with the infinitives. So the German word for can is können. German word for must is müssen, should, sollen, may, dürfen, and want or want to, wollen. A couple of things to be aware of. One is that must is often translated in English or used in English as an equivalent of have to have to. And may, likewise, has another translation that's to be allowed to. I think they're probably the most common ones rather than must and may. Here's the conjugation. Ich kann, I can. Du kannst, you can. Er, sie, es kann. He, she, it can. Wir können, we can. Ihr könnt, you plural can. And sie können, they can, or you formal can. Ich muss, I must. Du musst, you must. And let's get rid of that autocorrect. Er, sie, es muss. He, she, it must. Wir müssen, we must. Ihr müsst, you plural must. Sie müssen, they must, or you formal must. Ich soll, I should. Du sollst, you should. Er, sie, es soll. He, she, it should. Wir sollen, we should. Ihr sollt, you plural should. Sie sollen, they should, or you formal should. Ich darf, I'm allowed to. Du darfst, you're allowed to. Er, sie, es darf. He, she, it is allowed to. Wir dürfen, we are allowed to. Ihr dürft, you plural are allowed to. Sie dürfen, they are allowed to, or you formal are allowed to. Ich will, I will. No, it's not. It's I want. That's a classic trap. I want or I want to. Du willst, you want. Er, sie, es will. He, she, it wants. Wir wollen, we want. Ihr wollt, you plural want. Sie wollen, they want, or you formal want. Notice with the conjugation of the modal verbs, a couple of things. We have a pattern whereby the ich form does not have the usual e that we'd expect. And so I'm just going to highlight that with red. But likewise, the er, sie, es form doesn't have the t. In fact, it's exactly the same as the ich form, which is really weird, but that's what happens with modal verbs. So I'm going to highlight those with the same color. All the others have normal endings. So we have the st for du, the en for wir, the t for ihr, and the en for sie. Except the plural are completely regular. They're normal, and we get them straight from the infinitive. So you look at the infinitive to find the plural forms, but the singular one, the du here in the second person, still has a slightly weird stem. That means you can't just get that from the infinitive. You need to know this kann stem, which we also see in the ich and the er, sie, es forms. Okay, let's do some sentences. We've got 12 sentences here to translate. You might like to pause the video right now and have a go at translating these 12 sentences. This is the modal verbs in the present tense. Some simple, some slightly more complex, but all in the present tense. Let's have a go at them together. I must go. So we're going to look at our word for must or have to up here, and it's in the ich form. We see muss, so ich muss. And the next word is go. And with modal verbs, the thing about modal verbs is that they very often are followed by another verb. So our second verb is going to be go. And notice with the second verb that the ending does not have e, like you would expect when you say ich gehe, I go. Now, why is that? Why is it in this case that the e does not need to be there? Well, it's because the ich ending is already given in the first verb. So when a second verb in a German sentence, you don't need to mark who's in charge of that verb because you already know from the first verb. Number 2, I have to go. Well, this is the trick, of course. This is exactly the same thing. Ich muss gehen. And I hesitate to even start to write this, but lots of German learners will use haben when they're trying to say have to, but haben, to have, is different from müssen, which is to have to. There's a difference there. Have to means exactly the same thing as must. And that sort of signifies compulsion. I must. And that's different to possession, have. Number 3, you want to eat something. Du willst. So we're going straight to our wollen column over here, and we're choosing the correct form of wollen. And then we're going to say etwas essen. Now this is correct. Notice that the verb is in its infinitive form. It's got its en ending, and it's not as we would expect if we were just going to put the verb by itself as the only verb, in which case it would be du isst. That's a weird verb in itself because it changes the vowel in the present tense du and er forms. But it's not going to have that normal ending because we already have our ending in our modal verb. But notice something else. The verb's at the end of the sentence. And so really this sentence shows us our 2 important rules with modal verbs, which you just have to know and apply well. So our first rule is that the modal verb is in its infinitive form. We've already seen that. The modal verb not itself is in infinitive form, but is followed by a verb in the infinitive form. Sorry, I misspoke there. But secondly, the second verb is not preceded by zu. And thirdly, that the second verb is at the end of the sentence. So I've actually included 3 rules there. There are 3 rules. You could condense them into 2. But these are our 3 rules. And there's no zu before essen. It's in its infinitive form and it's at the end of the sentence. The reason why this second one is important, why that just slipped into my rules, is that with so many other verbs, it is the case. So for example, with hoffen, to hope, or versuchen, to try, or vorhaben, to intend, when you use those verbs, the second verb does have zu. Ich hoffe, am Wochenende kommen zu können. So in this example, we see that the verb hoffen, when it does have a second verb, will have zu before it. In fact, in this sentence, in this example, there are 3 verbs, but that doesn't matter. The most important thing is the second verb does have a zu before it. With modal verbs, that's not the case. So with modal verbs, we never have a zu before the second verb. Okay, now we can speed things up. We've seen those 3 rules, so we can speed things up. Number 4, do you want to eat something? Now notice, this is exactly the same as the previous sentence, just in a question form. So what do we do in a question? Well, if there's no question word, and there is no question word here like what or why or how or when, then we just put the verb first. So we're going to switch it around so that willst is before du. Want you something eat. Want you something eat. The tricky thing is this do, this German do, which does not exist in German as a helping verb. You can completely ignore that if you ever see a do with another verb in English, and just translate that verb that it goes with. So want you something eat. Number 5, she should do her homework. Sie soll ihre Hausaufgaben machen. So we've got our modal verb soll, and we got that from this table here. Sie soll, it's that sie form in the sollen column. And the second verb is going to go to the end of the sentence. It's in its infinitive form, and there's no zu. We are allowed to go out tonight. Number 6. Wir dürfen heute Abend ausgehen. Now, the interesting thing about this sentence is that we have a modal verb, but not just any verb following the modal verb. We have a separable verb, ausgehen. And ausgehen is the kind of verb that you will see separated. If you were to just put that verb by itself, ich gehe heute Abend aus. I'm going out tonight. So the aus and the gehen separate, but not with a modal verb, because they're at the same place. They're at the end of the sentence. The verb has reconciled those two parts, and it's in its infinitive form there with no zu. You, plural, are not allowed to go out tonight. Number 7. Ihr dürft heute Abend nicht ausgehen. So this time we're getting the ending from the same column here as the previous example, but from the ihr row, ihr dürft. And that's pretty self-explanatory. Same thing, we've got our separable verb at the end of the sentence. The nicht is going to go just before the verb that it's negating, that it's changing. Number 8, they want to play basketball on the weekend. Sie wollen am Wochenende Basketball spielen. Now, something to notice about this sentence. So, the same rules apply to number 8. We see the modal verb in its correct form, and that's from this place in the table. And then the verb right at the end of the sentence. Something to notice is the order of the other elements. So we say basketball on the weekend. Now German's going to put the when here before the what. The when is am Wochenende, and then the what is Basketball. And also basketball just naturally gravitates to spielen, because that's what it sort of goes with. And so it's going to go next to spielen there at the end of the sentence. Number 9, I should go, but I don't want to. Ich soll gehen, aber ich will nicht. Now we've got 2 modal verbs in this sentence. We have soll plus the second verb in that clause, go, in its infinitive form at the end of the clause. But then we have a comma, and we have a new clause, but I don't want to. Now again, ignore the do. Ignore this do, which is not doing anything. It's just helping us to say want in a negative way in English, like do not want. But in German it doesn't exist, so we just say I want not. I want not. And we don't have to repeat the again, I don't want to go, I want not to go, because it's already implied. We've already mentioned it once, and it's so obvious that it's going to, that's what we're referring to when we're using the wollen. Number 10, he can swim well, but he has to stay home. Kann gut schwimmen, aber muss zu Hause bleiben. He can swim well, but he has to stay home. So we've got 2 modal verbs. Where are they from? Let's find them in the table. He can swim well, but he has to stay at home. And again, here we've got 2 clauses. So we've got the first clause and then the second clause starting with aber. And aber can, essentially these are 2 sentences which aber connects for reasons of logic. You could write them as 2 separate sentences, but aber connects them here for us. And it doesn't do anything weird. After aber, the sentence just resets and you can start again, start a new clause with a normal word order. Number 11, today I want to relax. Heute will ich mich entspannen. Okay, so we're starting with the time phrase, heute, And if we do that, the verb has to be second. So even though in English we say I want, in German it has to be want I, because the verb must be second in every sentence. The second idea, the second concept. Now we know that it's going to be will because we look at our table here and we see that will is what connects up to ich. But another thing to point out in this sentence is this mich. Why is that there? Well, it's there because the verb for relax in German is a bit different. Sich entspannen, to relax. You have to actually say relax oneself. So I relax myself. That's what the sich is doing there. And that's why I need to say today, want I myself relax. It sounds like very stilted English, but this is perfectly logical German. You need to relax something. What are you going to relax? Well, I'm relaxing myself. And so that's going to go before the verb. The verb has to go in its infinitive form at the end of the sentence with no zu. And finally, unfortunately, we have to wear a school uniform. Leider müssen wir eine Schuluniform tragen. So this time again, we've got an adverb at the start of the sentence as the first idea, which means that the verb's going to go second before the person in charge of the verb. How do we know what the verb is? Well, we look at our table and hopefully we've memorized the table and we can see that müssen is the correct form for wir. If we want to say have to or must, leider müssen wir eine Schuluniform tragen. The second verb at the end of the sentence in its infinitive form with an en. I hope that was helpful. Feel free to ask me for particular verbs or tenses or vocabulary which you'd like to practice in translation form. And make sure that you do memorize this table. You need to memorize this table in order to be able to use these verbs fluently and regularly, and also these rules that go with modal verbs so that you're using them accurately.